The unseen hero, a man named Marcus, had never been a stranger to hate, but he had always refused to let it define him. Tall, confident, with a deep, calming presence, he had spent his life traveling from town to town, working in the shadows of history, leaving quiet ripples in places that would never know his name. It was a quiet Tuesday when Marcus stepped into the Gritty, a rundown bar in a small town in the Midwest. It was the kind of place where the floor was sticky and the air always smelled faintly of stale beer and bad decisions. The regulars, mostly older white men, sat hunched over their beers, talking about their small-town lives, unaware of how out of touch they had become with the world. Marcus walked in, head held high, his black leather jacket swaying with his every step. The chatter immediately stopped. Eyes turned toward him, suspicion rising as they eyed the stranger who had dared to enter their space. He was the kind of man who made people uneasy without saying a word, a presence that demanded attention. Without trying, he walked up to the bar and ordered a whiskey. The bartender, a wiry man named Jerry, hesitated but poured it anyway. The room grew tense, the kind of tension that fills the air before a storm. The men at the tables exchanged glances, muttering under their breath. They had all lived their lives in a bubble protected from the wider world, comfortable in their ignorance as Marcus sipped his drink. He could feel the weight of their stares. He didn't need to look at them to know what they were thinking. He'd seen it 1,000 times before. The uncomfortable glances, the whispering behind hands, the self-conscious laughs. But Marcus was unbothered. He didn't come to fight. He came to remind one by one. The men around the bar slowly stood up, as if to gauge whether or not they would need to confront him. But none did. Something about his calmness disarmed them. As the minutes passed, Marcus stayed silent, letting the tension build, letting them stew in their discomfort. Then, suddenly, the door swung open and a woman walked in. Her name was Lisa, and she was from the local town council. She was in her late 50s, a woman known for her no-nonsense attitude, a lifelong advocate for equality, and someone who had spent years fighting for the underserved communities in the area. The moment she stepped inside, the room grew even quieter. Lisa took one look at Marcus and then at the men in the room. She knew exactly who he was. "Everyone," Lisa called out, her voice steady but commanding. "I want you all to meet someone important." She stepped forward, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "This man," she said, "is Marcus Reynolds. He's not just any man. He's a living testament to resilience and change." "Do you know who he is?" The men shifted, confused. The air felt thick with uncertainty. Lisa smiled and spoke again. "Marcus is the son of a man who was one of the first black soldiers in the 101st Airborne during World War I. His father was there at Normandy. After the war, he came back to this very state, faced down hate, and helped build the first public school for black children here in the 1950s. His name was Joseph Reynolds, a hero who never saw his work recognized. And Marcus. Marcus here grew up hearing the stories. Not just stories of battles, but of the strength it took to stand up in places like this, in bars like the Gritty, against people who didn't want change. The men in the room began to shuffle, their eyes wide as realization began to dawn on them. They had no idea who this man was. They hadn't recognized the lineage of courage standing before them. Marcus. Lisa continued, spent his life fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. He worked with civil rights groups in the South. He helped integrate schools, and he's one of the unsung heroes of this nation. But most importantly, he's the son of a man who fought for this country without ever getting the recognition he deserved. Marcus turned to face the room. His voice was low, but every word cut through the room like a razor. "I don't need your respect," he said quietly, looking at each man in the eye. "But my father did. And he earned it. Every single day. And today, I'm just here to remind you all of the history that's been forgotten, and the legacy that's been hidden. The silence was deafening. No one spoke. The men who had once been so quick to judge now stood still, overwhelmed by the gravity of what they had just heard. Then, without another word, Marcus finished his drink, paid his tab, and walked out of the bar. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Some of the men stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, lost in their thoughts. Others looked to the ground, shame creeping into their hearts. One by one they began to speak quietly at first, and then with growing voices we never knew. One man muttered, "Damn," another said, shaking his head, "I didn't know his father was the one I didn't know," and with that, the veil lifted. The truth was finally out in the open. It wasn't a moment of violence or confrontation, but one of quiet revelation. The man they had judged had just reminded them of their own ignorance, and more importantly, the legacy of courage and dignity they had chosen to overlook it was in the most unexpected places. Under the most unassuming circumstances that history revealed itself. Sometimes all it took was a single person walking into a room to shatter a lifetime of prejudice. And in that small, quiet town, that's exactly what Marcus did.